Viserys Targaryen here, and I just wanted you to know, Christmas is coming.
All right, welcome back to another 25 days of Winds of Winter Year 2. And in today's video, and also tomorrow's video, we're going to be talking about Young Griff's parentage. We're going to break down each theory, the main two anyway. I know there's some other theories like him being a bright flame or him just being some random kid. But the main two we're going to talk about in this event is going to be him being a Targaryen and also him being a Blackfyre. Now, it's been quite a while since I've talked about this topic in its own video. I did a video about a year ago. It was one of the earlier videos on the channel where I broke down what if Young Griff actually is a Targaryen? What is like the actual evidence for that? Like him actually being Aegon. And so I did that video and I thought, let's remake it for this event. It's not very good on a rewatch given that the mic quality is not the best. It's very quiet and such. So we're going to go through some of the evidence here. It's going to be very similar to that video, but yeah. So let's kind of get into this. So the first thing I think we have to look at is, let's look at a little bit of the backstory. Is this plausible that he is Aegon? So again, something we get in the first book that's very apparent is that Aegon's body, you can't really see it. Like, it's all wrapped in this red crimson cloak just to, because it's a horrifying sight. You have this kid just dead. His skull has been crushed, basically. It's a really bad scene. So Tywin wraps it up so you can't really see it too much. And so, yeah, it's very plausible that this could be someone else that isn't Aegon. Just given the fact that we're not given a real description or really able to identify who this kid was to begin with. So in the backstory, it already checks out, right? It's very plausible to think that Varys could have gotten Aegon out. That's not where I think a lot of the holes in this theory really start. I think that part of it is all plausible. So let's kind of skip to some of the events of Dance when we meet this character of Young Griff, because that's where we have to pull a lot of the information that we have here. So the first thing I think we need to look at is the last chapter of Dance. And so the last chapter is very important because the scene where it's only Varys and Kevin. And Kevin is dying, right? So Varys has shot him with a crossbow. Again, very similar to Tywin's death. It's actually very tragic in that way. Again, always Kevin living in Tywin's shadow. And they die the same way. A little different, but kind of the same way. It's really to play on Cersei's paranoia, to pit her more and more against the Tyrells. And also just more paranoia against Tyrion and all that. So the important part of this, though, is that Varys, in this moment where it's a dying Kevin and just him, he says that Young Griff is legit, that he is Aegon. And now my biggest argument for why I could see why this makes sense for Aegon is that, again, he is stating it to him. And even here, it's like, if this was a lie, right? If Young Griff is a Blackfyre and Varys knows it, he's not going to say that here, one, because he's trying to convince, himself more than anyone that he is actually Aegon. Two, you never know who's listening in King's Landing, right? Varys would know that more than any person on the planet. So to me, I think, you can argue this on a lot of ways, right? If you're coming at this from a Blackfyre or Targaryen route, I think this line is probably the biggest evidence for Young Griff being a Targaryen or being actually Aegon, just based upon the fact of the context of why Varys is saying it. So again, I think, it's evidence that can be manipulated for each theory, but it'll be used in the Blackfyre one as well, just kind of as a counterpoint. But in this video, we'll leave it there. So the next kind of part of evidence is to kind of look at some of the characters that have identified this character as Aegon. So the first one is Tyrion. So Tyrion is someone that's able to come to the conclusion that this is Aegon. And he doesn't say that he's a Blackfyre. He doesn't pick up on any of that. He picks up on that he is this Targaryen prince. And that's very significant looking at the idea that Tyrion's very smart. He's someone that picks up on a lot of context clues and a lot of things. And Young Griff does display a lot of Targaryen features and habits. Now, the problem with differentiating those habits with Blackfyre habits is very difficult to do because Blackfyres are Targaryens. They're just a different branch. It's very similar to like the Starks and say the Karstarks, for instance. It's kind of in that realm, basically, of different lines. But yeah, so that's why I think it's very difficult when you look at Young Griff and you go, okay, he has really good leadership qualities. Well, so do a lot of the Blackfyres, right? Daemon Blackfyre, that was one of his best qualities. So there's a lot of problems when you look at Young Griff's character. You're like, oh, well, he has a lot of Valyrian features. So do the Blackfires. That's kind of the issue with that, is like there's no real way to look at that and go, okay, this is defining more for this side than it is for this side, because they both look the same. And in a lot of cases, Daemon Blackfire looked more Targaryen, more Valyrian than even some of the Targaryens of the age. Notably, if you look at Baelor Breakspear, he was someone that looked more Dornish than he did, Valyrian at the time. And so that's really, a point of contention, right? If you even want to look at that idea. And so moving on, we have Jon Connington. Now, Jon Connington was someone that knew Rhaegar really well, and he is someone that is also fully, believing that this child is Rhaegar's. And a part of him, I think, again, this is, just to play devil's advocate for why he could be a Blackfire here, is like, Jon Connington wants Young Griff to be a legit, son of Rhaegar, because it's, for him personally, he can redeem himself. Like, he was partly responsible for why the Targaryens fell, because of how he handled the whole situation with Robert and him being trapped and not being able to find him. That's part of the reason, right? So there's some of that own stuff there from Jon Connington that he wants this to be true, right? And also it's like, Aegon, if this is Aegon or if it's not Aegon, they were a young kid regardless. Like, there's no real way to like confirm that this really is Rhaegar's kid at that point. And so I'd be interested to see like how that conversation went down with Jon Connington, and Varys or Illyrio. Like, how did this all go down? I mean, I think that's something that'd be really interesting to explore in the next book. But again, I think it is significant that Jon Connington believes that this is Rhaegar's child, but at the same time, you can also look at some counterpoints as well. And that's kind of the big thing with a lot of the evidence here, is like, even when we get to the Blackfire evidence as well, there's ways that you can interpret them differently, which makes me so interested in Young Griff's character, because like a lot of people have discussed, like, Young Griff is a character that we may never get the identity to, right? George may just leave it to where it's like, maybe Dany thinks she's a Blackfire, but us, the readers, maybe we think he actually is a Targaryen based on new evidence that is brought up, or maybe it's vice versa, right? So there's a lot of that going on where it could just be hearsay, right? We think maybe he's a Blackfire, but we don't know. Or we think he's a Targaryen, but we don't know. We never get that information to confirm that. So I think that's really interesting and significant as well. So some other stuff I want to look at here with the Targaryen theory is the three heads of the dragon. So we know that there's kind of this idea of the Targaryens having the three heads of the dragon. It's what Rhaegar was trying to do with his children. You look at Aegon and his two sisters. So I think, to me, a lot of people, if you're going to say he's a Targaryen, you would go, oh, well, Aegon's going to be one of the three heads of the dragon, right? He's probably going to get, Viserion, or he's going to get Rhaegal. You do kind of actually run into an interesting idea if also Aegon and Jon had the same father, so they're actually much more closely related than Dany, which would be really interesting to see how that plays out. Who would get Rhaegal? Both of them being children of Rhaegar. That'd be really interesting. But yeah, so maybe, you sit here and you go, okay, Aegon's one of the heads of the dragon. He's going to ride a dragon. Now, one of the other facets that I forgot to bring up that I mentioned in the first video, because I did some little bit of research just to refresh my memory on some of the key points for this video, is that there was a point when George confirmed that there was going to be a second Dance of the Dragons. Now, okay, there's a lot of options that we have here. One of those options is if Young Griff, gets a dragon, and again, this doesn't even play on if he is a Targaryen or a Blackfire, right? Like, he still has that dragon blood. If we even look at the dragon seeds, right? During the Dance of the Dragons, they were not full Targaryens either. In a lot of cases, some of them were Velaryons or whatever. And so you sit here and you go, okay, technically Young Griff doesn't need to be a Targaryen. But to call it a Dance of the Dragons when the main conflict was between Targaryens or different branches of Targaryens, you would maybe assume, okay, that this could be some evidence that Young Griff is a Targaryen. Now, like I said, this is very highly interpretable because the main whole conflict was between the dragons. So you could say if Euron gets a dragon, for instance, you could have the Dance of the Dragons between Euron and Dany, okay? For instance, like that. There's a lot of different routes you can kind of go with that idea of the Dance of the Dragons that George talked about, his second one anyway. But I think, when we get into the Blackfire evidence, I'm going to cite some other things that I think will be interesting to see how you guys interpret them. Do you think maybe it's actually evidence for the Targaryens or whatnot? But that is kind of the video, guys. Thank you guys all for watching. If you guys think I didn't bring up some of the evidence, let me know in the comments, because whenever we do remasters of these, I may add some of your guys' thoughts and all these things. That was one thing I kind of looked at a little bit on the last video we did of this probably about a year, a little over a year probably ago, as I looked through the comments just to see what your guys' thoughts were on that video after I watched it. So thank you guys all for watching, and I will see you guys in tomorrow's video. We'll be talking about Young Griff being a Blackfire, and as you guys know, that is one of my favorite theories, so I'm really excited.